Welcome to another beautiful day at the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library, a very special day. My name is David Jones. I have the honor to serve as the President and CEO of the George and Barbara Bush Foundation. And I'm honored and delighted this morning to serve as your Master of Ceremonies for this very special occasion when we will dedicate the President George Herbert Walker Bush Commemorative Stamp. Thank you for joining us for this exciting and very special event. And we welcome all of you who are watching us on live streaming this morning. Thank you for tuning in. We're also pleased to welcome several staff members from our congressional and state legislative delegation. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your public service. The tradition of placing the images of former presidents on postage stamps dates back to the mid-1980s, when George Washington was the first to be honored in this way. It was actually 1847, to be exact. And one of the things that makes today's occasion so special is that today, June 12th, President Bush would have celebrated his 95th birthday. So I think we should begin by saying, happy birthday, President Bush. Right. And we shouldn't let the moment pass without also wishing Barbara Bush a happy birthday. Just last Saturday, June 8th, the former First Lady would have celebrated her 94th birthday. So happy birthday to both. Two quick housekeeping notes before we get underway. If you haven't already done so, please silence your phone. Thank you for doing that. And if you're sharing photos today from the event on social media, please use hashtag GHWBushStamp. That's hashtag GHWBushStamp or hashtag US President Stamp. That helps publicize today's ceremony. And at this time, I ask you to stand for the presentation of colors by the Texas A&M University Corps of Cadets Honor Guard, followed by the national anthem performed by the Texas A&M Singing Cadets under the longtime direction of our friend, Mr. David Kipp.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming. And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave?
Please be seated. Every one of today's presenters listed in your printed program knew, was close to, and worked with President George H.W. Bush, including the gentleman I'm about to introduce who will sing for us this morning with the Singing Cadets. The multi-talented Fred Mcclure is a gifted vocalist. He is a graduate of Texas A&M University. And in his undergraduate years, he served as student body president. Fred served as a senior member of the White House staff advising Presidents Reagan and President George H.W. Bush on legislative affairs. He's also my predecessor as the CEO of the then George Bush Presidential Library Foundation, now the George and Barbara Bush Foundation. Today, Fred serves as the executive director of the Leadership Initiative here at Texas A&M, and he serves as a member of the George and Barbara Bush Foundation Board of Directors. Please give a warm welcome to Fred Mcclure as he joins the Singing Cadets.
Yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shores. Send these, the homeless tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountain to the prairie, to the ocean, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
The storm clouds gather far across the sea. Let us swear allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair, as we raise our voices in a solemn prayer. Stand
Fred, that was wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you to the singing cadets who are staying with us for the program, to David Kipp and the Corps Honor Guard. Thank you very, very much. Now I'm pleased to introduce our dedicating official who comes to us from the United States Postal Service. The Honorable Robert Mike Duncan is chairman of the Board of Governors of the Postal Service, which is comparable to the Board of Directors of a publicly held corporation. The board directs the Postal Service's expenditures, conducts long-range planning, and sets policies, service standards, and capital investments. Earlier in his career, Mike Duncan served as the Assistant Director of the White House Office of Public Liaison under President George H.W. Bush. And he was chairman of the Republican National Committee from 2007 to 2009. He also served as a member of the Board of Directors of the Tennessee Valley Authority from 2006 to 2011, and was chairman of the TVA's board from 2009 to 2010. In 2017, he was named the 17th chairman of the President's Commission on White House Fellowships. And outside of government service, Governor Duncan was president and CEO of the American Coalition for Clean Coal Electricity. He is currently the chairman of the Board of Trustees of Alice Lloyd College in Kentucky, and chairman and CEO of the Inez Deposit Bank in Inez, Kentucky. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Governor Mike Duncan.
Well, good morning. Welcome. David, thank you. I appreciate that overly generous introduction this morning. My mother would say that I can't keep a job. You know, I've just had many opportunities, and so many of those opportunities started here with this man. On behalf of the United States Postal Service, I'm pleased to welcome everyone to today's dedication of the President George H.W. Bush Commemorative Forever Stamp. The number of people we have here today is a reminder of how we all continue to be touched by and grateful for the life of this remarkable man. For more than 180 years, the United States has honored national heroes on our postage stamps. The tradition began with the portrait of George Washington and the first Postmaster General, Benjamin Franklin. That started in 1847. And it appropriately continues here today with President George Herbert Walker Bush. In fact, it's especially fitting to honor President Bush with his own stamp because he truly understood the power of a handwritten letter or note. And we'll hear more about that later. Over the course of his life, he wrote literally thousands of now cherished letters to family, friends, supporters, even adversaries. I know I still have my first letter from George Bush when he was chairman of the Republican National Committee, and I picked him up at the airport. He got great humor out of that day because he was in Lexington to do a speech for us, and the chairman of the Republican Party in Lexington was a funeral director. So guess what I was driving to pick him up that day? Well, he never forgot that, and neither did Mrs. Bush, who was standing on the outside of the Lexington airport that day. So we had a lot of good laughs over the years over that. But he wrote many letters, and Gene Becker's going to talk a little bit more about that later. But could I get a show of hands of people that received notes or letters from? Look at this. I mean, all over the room today. It's really, really something. He understood the power of written word to connect with people, and he wielded that power with the grace and dignity that he carried in every aspect of his life. Jean's going to talk more about that, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of her stories. Having served in the Bush administration and personally known the president, I'm particularly honored to be part of this today. We had a stamp dedication yesterday in Hawaii, but I wanted to be here today. This is more important to me personally and more important to the country. In his 94 years, President Bush taught us how to serve, how to live, and how to love. How to serve, how to live, and how to love. And think about those themes in his life. He taught us how to serve by constantly answering the call. He did it himself. When he was just 18, he became one of the youngest pilots in the Navy during World War II and went on to fly dozens of combat missions and survive being shot down in the Pacific. You know those stories. They're absolutely true and meant a lot to him. After the war, he went on to serve as a United States congressman. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Chairman of the Republican National Committee, Chief of the U.S. Liaison Office in China, opening up relations there, Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, Vice President under President Reagan, and then finally, arguably the most qualified man ever to sit in the Oval Office, he became President of the United States. Quite a resume. As president, George Bush wisely and steadily led a nation through a tumultuous period, think back, where we saw the end of the Cold War. Lots of mistakes could have been made during that period of time, but they weren't. He saw the end of the unification of Germany with NATO, saw that through. He also led an unprecedented multinational coalition during the Persian Gulf War that led to Kuwait's liberation from Iraq. Remember how proud we were of that? America stood up, America at its finest. Here at home, President Bush signed historic legislation that prohibits discrimination against those with disabilities. I look in the audience and I see people today that worked on the ADA signing ceremony. That was a proud day for the Bush administration. I'll never forget being there that day. In his retirement, he helped work with victims of natural disasters in Asia, Caribbean, and the United States. George Bush also taught us how to live. He taught us how to serve. He taught us how to live. He was a serious man who made a point of not taking himself too seriously, and he loved jokes. You always needed to have a new joke for him, even if the target of the joke was him. Remember when he invited Dana Carvey to the White House to do the impersonation? And what was that for? To cheer up the staff because they were down. He loved good stories and good jokes. He and President Reagan exchanged those often. Well, when he wasn't busy, you could always find him taking out a family or friend or host on the boat Fidelity. Now, I have another story about that, too. I was invited up to Kennebunkport along with some other people, and we were getting ready for lunch, and he said, "Come on, I'll take you across, and we'll take the boat." And Mrs. Bush looked at me. I'd worked with her before, and she said, "No." She said some other things I won't repeat today. But she said, "You're crazy if you do that." Well, I thought, no, it couldn't be that bad. I could see where we were going, so I went in, and the first thing that happened was the Secret Service grabbed a hold of my belt, and the guy said, "Buckle up." And I thought, what's he talking about? Well, it wasn't very long until I saw that boat go straight like that, and we were on our way. It took me a while to recover before lunch, but I know many of you have stories like that working with him. The Fidelity was one of the prides of his life. Well, we'll always remember our former president who marked his 80th, 85th, and 90th birthdays by skydiving. This sense of joy and wonder remains, and what a gift to us it is to be alive and to use every moment possible. Well, finally, George Bush taught us how to love. How is that? Through his service, he taught us about the love of country and the love of community. But the only thing that President Bush loved more than his country was his family. He was a devoted husband, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, the patriarch of a family that continues to give back to this country. Our stamp today is just one small way we can remember President Bush and honor his legacy. The portrait of President Bush on this stamp was painted by the renowned artist Michael Diaz and is based on the photograph taken by Timothy Greenfield Sanders in 1997. The art director and stamp designer was Phil Jordan. I trust you'll agree this stamp perfectly captures the spirit and essence of a truly remarkable man. Now I would like to invite our distinguished speakers and guests to join me as we dedicate the George H.W. Commemorative stamp on stage.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, everyone. Isn't that a wonderful image? Wonderful stamp. When we unveiled the artwork in April, a couple months ago here at the library, a number of people wanted to know, well, where did the image come from, and who chose the image for the stamp? Well, I doubt that George Washington got to choose his image in 1847, but George Bush did get to choose his. And the image actually came from a photograph that originally was on the cover of Texas Monthly in 1997. It was a picture of President and Mrs. Bush together, and the cover was part of a cover story on the fact that we were dedicating the Presidential Library in 1997. He always liked the image, and so artist Michael Dees painted what you see there for the stamp. So he did get to select his own image, which makes it even more wonderful. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, Warren Finch, one of my partners here at the George H.W. Bush Center. The Bush Center is comprised of three entities: the Presidential Library and Museum, the Bush School of Government and Public Service, and the George and Barbara Bush Foundation. Warren Finch is the director of the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library and Museum. Warren has 30 years of experience working with the National Archives, beginning with the Office of Presidential Libraries in Washington, then with the Ronald Reagan Library in California. He was detailed from the National Archives to the White House in 1992 to assist in moving the Bush presidential materials to College Station, Texas. And I'm happy to say that he has been here ever since. He has served as the director of the Library and Museum since 2004. I'm delighted to introduce my colleague and great friend, Warren Finch.
Thank you, David. Howdy. And welcome. It's been a little over a year since we lost Mrs. Bush, and just about 6 months ago that President Bush died. They were both so much a part of the Library and Museum in Texas A&M and Bryan and College Station. Here so often in the fall, winter, and spring for programs that they became a fixture in the town. Spotted at local restaurants, and when in better health, the president would visit the rec center, and both attended baseball, basketball, and football games. And always modest. When we remodeled the museum exhibit several years ago, President Bush wanted to know why we were putting so much about him in the exhibits. He was all about giving others credit, but it was a former president and first lady that people wanted to know about. And after explaining this to him, including the accomplishments of others who served alongside him, I think we finally reached a compromise. This stamp is a fitting tribute to the man we admire. I'm sure he would say, if he were here, that his mom might not approve of all this attention on him. As a child, she would tell him, "Don't be a braggadocio, George." He never forgot that admonishment, but today I think she would be proud and approve of this stamp, which is a fitting tribute to a man who answered his country's call so many times. We miss them both so much, but we were lucky that they were a part of our lives for so long. While you're here, I hope you will visit the gravesite where the President and Mrs. Bush are interred, as well as their daughter, Robin. And please visit the museum and learn about the former President and First Lady's lives through our exhibit. Much of the story is told in their own words, with the help of 100 interactive exhibits, which detail their years from their early childhood until the left public office, and their years after. Both the President and First Lady remain active always, helping others in so many ways. Today, in celebration of their 95th birthday, we have birthday cake, ice cream from Bluebell, and a great celebration over at the library beginning at 12. I hope you will join me. Thank you very much.
Warren, thank you very much, and thank you for your outstanding leadership as the director of our Presidential Library. Our next speaker is Chase Untermeyer, who service and work with President Bush dates back to 1965. Not trying to age you, Chase, but probably longer in service than any of our other speakers. Chase is the former ambassador to the country of Qatar and is the current chairman of the Qatar America Institute in Washington, D.C. Chase has enjoyed a varied and distinguished career, having served in the Navy, served in state and federal government, with additional work in journalism, academia, and business. In 1980, Chase served as Vice President Bush's executive assistant, and he went on to serve as Assistant Secretary of the Navy in the Reagan years, and as Director of White House Personnel in President Bush's administration. He's the author of 3 acclaimed books on the Reagan-Bush era that are based on his diaries. Like President and Mrs. Bush, Chase has been a faithful diarist. Having started the practice when he was 9 years old, it continues to this day. Please give a great warm welcome to our friend, Ambassador Chase Untermeyer.
Thank you, David. Howdy. J. Edward Day was a Chicago attorney who, much to his surprise, was appointed U.S. Postmaster General by President Kennedy. He wrote of this experience in a wry memoir called My Appointed Round. In it, General Day recalled that once we were asked to issue a stamp honoring the 100th anniversary of the pretzel industry. I suggested we would be glad to issue a pretzel stamp if only someone would come up with a glue for it that would taste like beer. Day continued, I repeated that remark in a speech to a small group in New Orleans after dinner at Antoine's. A brewery owner present jumped to his feet and said, Mr. Day, I have the solution to your problem. Our beer tastes like glue. Now, it's just as well the stamp being issued today is self-adhesive and needs no glue, because President Bush would have insisted it tastes like a vodka martini. George Herbert Walker Bush climbed to the White House atop all the personal notes and letters he wrote. Well trained by his formidable mother, he never let even a day pass before he took out a card or a piece of stationery and penned his thanks, greetings, regrets, observations, congratulations, consolations, condolences, encouragements, jokes, gentle jibes, and much else to whomever he had just seen or just thought about. Once an autograph catalog offered for sale a typical blue-bordered card by the then Vice President of the U.S., who had written something like, Dear Mr. and Mrs. Steinhardt, Barbara and I send our best wishes to you on your 50 years of marriage. Many, many more. Now, he probably wrote the card in immediate response to the request of a friend, a campaign aide, or a Secret Service agent. It was listed at $600. When I mentioned this at a White House staff meeting, the Roosevelt room fell momentarily silent as my colleagues calculated the fortune in their files. Dozens and dozens of such notes times $600. But quite quickly, the reality of the marketplace hit. America was virtually papered with blue-bordered cards from George Bush. No way they could bring that much. True, but what each card and letter did bring was a smile of gratitude for the simple thoughtfulness of a man who took the time to write them. And in conveying George Bush's heart, those 2 or 3 handwritten lines on each card were more successful and impactful than pages of typed official sentiment. To all youngsters present, and that means pretty much everyone other than myself, this is the radical, outside-the-box, terribly effective business technique that President Bush's life teaches us. Yes, you can text or email or Instagram people today, and they will be glad you did. But if you really want to make them grateful, those friends, relatives, and clients, take out a piece of paper and a pen and write them a few sentences in your own hand. Oh, and don't forget to put this handsome stamp on the envelope. It contains no glue in any flavor. Of this splendid tribute to the U.S. Postal Service's best ever customer, we can truly say it can't be licked.
Thank you, Chase. Always entertaining, Chase Untermeyer. I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, Gene Becker, who served as President Bush's Chief of Staff in his post-presidency from 1994 until his death last November. And among her many, many duties and accomplishments as Chief of Staff, Gene researched and edited President Bush's remarkable book of letters entitled All the Best. It was first published in 1999 and updated in 2013. During President Bush's White House years, Gene served as Deputy Press Secretary for First Lady Barbara Bush, and later she helped Mrs. Bush research and edit her autobiography, Barbara Bush, a Memoir, and the follow-up book, Reflections. Before joining the Bush White House staff in 1989, Gene was a newspaper reporter for 10 years, including a 4-year stint at USA Today as, I think, the weather reporter, as I recall. Is that right?
For 1 year.
For 1 year, right. Gene is a member of the boards of directors of all of the Bush's legacy foundations, including Points of Light, the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy, and the George and Barbara Bush Foundation. And in her spare time, she serves on the advisory board of the Bush School of Government and Public Service. Today, Gene is actually working on 2 new books. One on Barbara Bush, soon to be published, we think, and then after that book is out, she will start on a book on President Bush. So stay tuned for news on both of these future bestsellers. Gene Becker.
Okay, who knew it would be hard to follow Chase Untermeyer? Gosh. And speaking of Chase's diary keeping, I had dinner with he and his wife Friday night. He took diary notes during the dinner. I'm a little concerned about that. Anyway, thank you, David. Thank you, Governor Duncan, and all the George Bush and stamp lovers here today. Speaking of stamps, a couple years ago, we did some homework in the office of George Bush to gauge the volume of our incoming and outgoing mail. Here are just a couple of statistics. President Bush received an average of 200 pieces of mail a day. Since 1993, the office had sent an estimated 149,700 congratulatory letters to Eagle Scouts. We sent 200 to 300 military retirement letters a month, and since 1993, an estimated 43,500 congratulatory letters were sent for births, weddings, birthdays, and anniversaries. Now, he was a great man. He was a brilliant man, but he did not do this alone. Behind every great man stands an incredible team of mainly women, and it gives me really great pleasure. Most of them are here today. The mastermind was President Bush's longtime director of correspondence, Linda Pepsel. Yes, occasionally she would get frustrated, and once or twice, it's possible, I saw her throw mail on the floor. I would like to say she always picked it up. And helping her were a team of incredible volunteers, many of whom started volunteering for President Bush in the 1960s. They faithfully came in at least once a week, sometimes more often, to open, sort, and help answer mail, and yes, lick a stamp or two. Most of them are here today, and they're going to kill me, but I would like to ask Linda and all our volunteers to please stand so we can thank them for all they did. Okay, you have to sit down because I only have 3 minutes. So when President Bush left office, people, of course, encouraged him to write his memoirs. He was rather allergic to this idea. The good news was we figured out he had already written his memoirs. through literally the tens of thousands of letters he had written during his lifetime. When put together, they told the story of a man whose life was rich, exciting, important, and sometimes just plain fun. Thus, the book, All the Best, was born. You can buy it at the Library Museum store. It seemed appropriate today to share one or two letters with you, but when I started thinking about what to read, what a tough decision. I'm not going to go over his accomplishments because Governor Duncan did a great job of that. But I thought, oh my gosh, I could read about his presidency, his vice presidency, the CIA, the United Nations, China. Literally, last night at 10:30, I'm thinking, what to read? I've picked a letter. He wrote this November 12th, 2002, to Dan Amos, chairman of the board and CEO of Aflac. Dear Dan, this will be the most unusual request you have ever received from any president of the United States of America. The truth is, I need 2 more of those tiny, furry Aflac ducks. Why, you might ask? Well, the answer is Sadie, our beloved dog, who sleeps in our bed and dominates our lives, loves the Aflac duck that you gave me at that marvelous event, Aflac meeting in Las Vegas. It's quiet around our house now because the Aflac duck is missing. Quite frankly, I'm glad. But Barbara and Sadie both miss hearing that duck go, Aflac, Aflac. So if you have a couple of those ducks lying around, would you mind sending them to me? I would be willing to pay for the ducks and even pay shipping and handling. I didn't want that great company of yours to go in the red because of this. Most sincerely, George Bush. Yeah, you didn't see that coming, did you? Which is why I read it. But that's a George Bush most of us knew and loved. He was funny, dear, brilliant. Given we had another important birthday last weekend, I'd like to read this letter he wrote Barbara Bush on January 6, 1994. Will you marry me? Oops, I forgot you did that 49 years ago today. I was very happy on that day in 1945, but I'm even happier today. You've given me joy that few men know. You've made our boys into men by bawling them out, and then right away by loving them. You've helped Doro be the sweetest, greatest daughter in the whole world. I have climbed perhaps the highest mountain in the world, but even that cannot hand a candle to being Barbara's husband. Mom used to tell me, now George, don't walk ahead. Little did he know, I was only trying to keep up with Barbara Pierce from Onondaga Street in Rye, New York. I love you. He was indeed the world's best letter writer. And I love that Governor Duncan asked for how many people had a letter from him. I'm worth millions. Who knew? But there really is likely not one person here today whose life President Bush did not touch in one way or the other. And maybe that isn't too surprising given where we are. But consider this. When he died, the world leaders were gathered in Argentina for a G8 summit. When they were told the news that President Bush had died, German Chancellor Angela Merkel remarked that without him, she would not be sitting at that table. She would still be trapped behind the Iron Curtain, living in East Germany. So no surprise that she, along with a lot of other world leaders, came to the funeral 5 days later. And just this past Sunday night, if you watch the Tony Awards, you know the first ever disabled person won an award for Best Acting. The young woman was joyous, speaking from her wheelchair, and appropriately thanked her parents, her friends, her support network. She's too young to know that she should have thanked the 41st President of the United States of America. It's unlikely she would have been on that stage without him and without the ADA. So thank you, President Bush. Thank you for making life better for all of us. Happy birthday.
Thank you, Jean Becker. Thank you for your extraordinary service to President and to Mrs. Bush and the Bush family. And what a pleasure it is to introduce our final speaker today, speaking of Bush family, Pierce Bush, who is the grandson of President and Mrs. George H.W. Bush. Pierce has continued the very well-known Bush family tradition of volunteerism and service to others. He serves today as the CEO of Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Lone Star, and is responsible for coordinating all things related to fundraising, programming, setting the strategic direction of the organization, which is the largest Big Brothers, Big Sisters affiliate in the nation. Under his leadership, Big Brothers Big Sisters has recently completed construction of its new $8 million headquarters building, beautiful building, in downtown Houston. Pierce has been recognized by the Houston Business Journal as the youngest member of Houston's 40 under 40 class of 2016. And last year, he was recipient of the Business Journal's Most Admired CEO Award. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Pierce Bush.
Okay, don't worry about it. It's hard to follow Gene Becker. I did not think I'd get emotional, but I did. Chairman Duncan, distinguished guests, friends, as a loving grandson of George Bush, my Gampy, it is my incredible honor to be here and represent the entire Bush family as we celebrate and honor our hero on what would have been his 95th birthday today with this most awesome birthday present, the George H.W. Bush Forever Stamp. In my calculation, there is perhaps no President George H.W. Bush without the United States Postal Service, and so this tribute today is especially fitting. I say that because it was through this particular medium, throughout the entirety of his great American life, that my grandfather's true heartbeat came alive. As a man who struggled to sometimes articulate how he felt through spoken word or in public speeches, he never once remotely struggled to express himself fully when penning and mailing someone a letter. And as his life of letters showed time and again, that Gampy had a heart full of empathy for the other guy's condition, deep love for his family, his friends, and his faith, compassion for those less fortunate, courage for the challenges that laid ahead, ambition to try his best and to be the best at everything he set out to do. His letters showed his unique ability to lift others up just at the time they needed to be lifted, and much to the delight of my cousins and me, they were always filled with his great love and his sense of humor. At a very young age, you could also say that the United States Mail Service forever influenced Gampy's understanding of the broader world and human condition, enabling him to clearly see past the unique privilege of his Greenwich, Connecticut upbringing. As one of the youngest naval aviators in World War II, Lieutenant George Bush was tasked on occasion to censor outgoing mail, written by the enlisted men to ensure that no sensitive military information was being transmitted. In later years, every time he reflected and talked about this experience, his eyes would fill with tears and the words would never fully come to the surface. So in typical Gampy fashion, he wrote about it. Quote, "Heck, I was only 19 or 20 and I learned about people's sexual drives. We censors were not voyeurs, but as I did my duty and read the other guy's mail, I learned a lot about life, about true love, heartbreak, about fear and courage, about the diversity of our great country. The sailors would write their loved ones inquiring about the harvest or fishing in the streams or wondering if it was hot in the cities. When I would see a man whose letter I had censored, I would look at him differently, look at him with much more understanding. I gained insight into the lives of my shipmates, and I felt richer for the experience. These insights gained from this duty and others would shape and form a man who would one day vote for the Civil Rights Act of 1968 as a freshman U.S. congressman, despite the legislation's unpopularity in his district and the political risks that the affirmative vote carried. A man who as our 41st president would one day peacefully end the greatest conflict of the second half of the 20th century, the Cold War, through diplomacy and friendship, without a single bullet being fired. The insights helped form a man who would forever bring down the shameful walls of exclusion for people with disabilities with the championing and signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act. His writings helped shape his view that America was at its best when its citizens volunteered and took compassionate action, calling for thousands of points of light to shine brightly across our country. The list goes on, and without a doubt, the 4 years that George and Barbara Bush occupied the White House were certainly 4 years that changed our country and our world for the better. Years when freedom, opportunity, and just basic human decency carried the day. In addition to all of that, Gampy was simply put the world's best grandfather. And through his many letters to us, he gave us all the best gift a child or grandchild could possibly receive, that of unconditional love. His letters showed us through 73 years of marriage to our loved Ganny what true commitment really looks like. He showed us what loyalty meant. No matter how heavy his responsibilities were, he was always grounded with us and willing to host a competitive tennis game or backgammon tournament. He had fun constantly, and those traits are all captured perfectly in his writings. I, like all of my cousins and family members, dearly miss my Gampy. But thanks to letters he wrote to us and so many others, his words, his dreams, and his hopes live on, and his incredible spirit endures forever. Thank you for honoring our great American hero with a stamp we can use for generations to come, a stamp that will continue to advance a forum in which his expressions of a kinder and gentler America were second to none.
Thank you, Piers, for wonderfully representing the Bush family today. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our ceremony. Before we go, I'd like to thank our participants one more time: Mike Duncan from the Postal Service, Fred Mcclure, Warren Finch, Chase Untermeyer, Gene Becker, and Pierce Bush. And thanks to all of you. Yes. And special thanks to Texas A&M Singing Cadets and the Texas A&M Corps of Cadets Honor Guard. Thank you. Now, in a few minutes, some of our participants will be available to autograph your programs. Apparently, that's another one of the traditions at these events. And you can, as you probably have figured out, you can purchase the stamp and other related items at the retail booth in the lobby. The autograph session will take place out there as well. And again, thank you for joining us. We hope you will visit the library and museum while you're here. As Warren Finch said, it's a great walk to the gravesite. If you haven't been out there, what a wonderful thing to do on President Bush's birthday. And you can also visit the museum store without a ticket. So you don't need a ticket to go to the gravesite or the museum store. But of course, if you want to buy a ticket, we'd be delighted to have you do that as well. Thank you again for being here. Have a wonderful day.